So thank you so much for joining us for this solo traveler meetup. And today we're lucky enough to have a special guest with us tonight, Loni James, a travel writer and storyteller who quit her job to solo travel around the world with the added goals of going on a date and a hike at every stop of her journey. She is now back in the US and is taking a small break from an epic road trip that took her across Africa. And now I want to thank her so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Loni, for those who are watching who may not have seen your article in CNN or your appearance in countless other media outlets, please tell us a bit about yourself before you started your solo travel journey and how you decided to embark on the adventure that you've been on for the last year and a half.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel really privileged to be here. I'm always happy to talk and encourage other solo travelers. So thank you so much for including me. I am originally from Washington State. I had been working in medical sales before this. I worked in respiratory and anesthesia sales. One of my coworkers is on the call. And I worked through the pandemic, which we all know was really stressful. And I'd been dreaming of traveling long term for a really significant period of time, but my mother had been really sick. And so I had delayed it for a decade. And she ended up passing at the end of 21. And I sold all my belongings and left. And I had this new perspective of seeing the world while I can, because I wasn't sure that retirement was guaranteed. I wasn't sure that my body would take me up a mountain 20 years from now. I wasn't sure the money would be there. And so I just prioritized building a life that I wanted, and that I dreamed of, and doing it while I can. And so I bought a one-way ticket with really no plans. And here I am a year and a half later, 26 countries, and really, really happy. So thanks for
Amazing.
having me.
Yeah, no, I love that for you. And I mean, once again, good for you because it's really brave to actually do like most people, they think about it, but really it's so hard to actually decide to do it because it really is a scary thing to embark on if you've just and also but it's so rewarding in the end. So I'm so glad you found it. But most people usually only decide to travel. So, the question arises, how did you decide on including the objective of going on a date in each destination? Because that's not typically something that we hear. Although, it can happen. It does occasionally obviously happen. But what made you decide to add that as one of your goals?
It was really spontaneous. I actually was on a hike here in the Northwest with my hiking buddy, and we were talking, and I was like, you know what? I'm single. I think I'm going to date as I travel. And the more I thought about it, I realized it can be really difficult to connect with locals. If you're traveling and staying in hostels, it's really easy to meet people, but I'm meeting other travelers, which is great. We always have loads to talk about. We have great experiences together, but I haven't learned from an Australia person about the culture of South Africa. So I was like, I really want to be intentional about meeting locals. And I was like, dating seems like a really great way to do that. If I happen to fall in love, great. But also, if not, I've just met cool people along the way and I can't complain. And so I tend to be like a list and deadline person. So I was like, what a country seems really doable. And then I started writing. It kind of took a life of its own. And then people were like, okay, where's the next episode of our date? Like, what'd you do now? What sort of situation did you end up in? And so people really enjoyed learning about the different cultures and gender roles and marriage expectations and different dynamics, as well as some of my non-traditional stories. So kind of got a life of its own, and I've enjoyed it and will continue to do it. So.
Nice. But you bring up a good point there too, because I do realize even when I'm traveling, I typically tend to meet more people that are not from where I am. Like because
Mm-hmm.
as you said, you're meeting other travelers. And so I mean, I've definitely met more Australians outside of Australia.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
I
sorry, go ahead.
I think just there's certain cultures that really prioritize travel. Australians, I always meet Canadians. I usually meet British people, a lot of Western Europeans. They're very much encouraged to take time off and travel, or they have a decent amount of vacation time. And so it's very easy to connect with them while you're traveling. But I think as I get older, I meet a lot of people that don't want to stay in hostels. And so they're staying in hotels. So they're having a much more difficult time meeting people or connecting with other travelers or even locals on the road. So you have to be really intentional. And for me, dating proved the gateway to be able to connect, meet new friends, potentially find romance, but just be able to put myself out there as a solo traveler and meet people along the way.
And expanding on that, I mean, just because, as you said, it is very difficult to meet people. Like, how did you meet people for the dates? Like sort of what methods did you find worked best for you, and what didn't work as well?
Yeah. So generally speaking, I use dating apps. For me, that's worked really well. I actually use a couple of the premium subscriptions like Tinder Passport so I can change my location because what I found worked best was swiping in a location before I even got there. You
Mhm.
need to do a little bit of a get to know you and chit chat and talk about some interests before you actually say, hey, do you want to meet on a date? And so if I could do that leading up to the time that I arrived, it meant that I could often have a date within 24 to 48 hours of arriving. And to be perfectly honest, I had some lovely dates that were so excited for me to be in their country and their culture that they were like, you need to go here, you need to do this, we're going to go do this together, and planned all of these fun things for us that I never would have thought to plan and or even had knowledge of. And so they really changed the dynamic of my time in a city or a place based on their suggestions. And so if I prioritized meeting up early, it also meant that I could go on a second, third, and fourth date if they happened to be really lovely.
I was about to ask that. Like, were there, and it sounds like there were like people that you did go on more than just one date.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's quite a few people that I went out with on more than one occasion. And there was plenty of people that I would have continued to go out with them if I had been in their location longer. I simply wasn't there for
Right.
an extended period of time. So I just worked with the time that I had and then, moved on. But if I went back to certain cities, 100% I would reach out to these people and we would grab a drink and catch up and it would be great.
And the other thing that just occurred to me as well, because I know there's probably a lot of people that may or may not have used dating apps very much. So is there, I mean, because there's like with, I'm trying to think in terms of what I don't know if you have any if it would be any tips or something in terms of even just like when you match with someone. Did you find that you generally reached out first, or they reached out first, or does it even matter? Like, and even like, what would you how to even begin that conversation? Because a lot of people are usually very sort of unsure about that process as well. So for anyone who hasn't really used dating apps as well, what would be your advice around that?
I think for me, really important is that my bio, my profile is very explicit that I'm traveling full time. I'm going on dates as I travel. I don't want anybody to have the expectation that I'm looking to stay there, fall in love, and start a family. That is not on the table. So I wanted to be really clear so that there was not a frustration on their part. They were like, hey, I was expecting something else. So I'm really straightforward that I'm traveling. I'm leaving. I'm excited to learn. I'm going to ask you questions. I often would even say I really enjoy activities and, non-traditional dates to kind of clue them in that like, hey, if we go out, I appreciate creativity or something other than a coffee date. Um, so I think just being really upfront and honest and being open to having an expectation conversation. Every culture is different. And some cultures, the men are very much the moment you match, I would get a slew of messages. And then other cultures, they kind of sit and wait. And so it really depended and shifted for me if I needed to be the one to reach out or they were the one to reach out. I did learn, which was part of like the interesting thing as I dated in all these countries, was certain cultures online dating isn't like normalized yet and it's really taboo or it's just not popular. And like in Italy, I learned that Italian women are embarrassed to be on the dating apps. They consider it a fail as a woman, a failure as a woman, that they have not found a man in a traditional way. So if you get on the dating apps in Italy, it is a slew of men and very few women. And I even like I heard this from the man that I went on a date with, and I was like, this is his perspective. Is that accurate? And then I asked some Italian women, they're like, yeah, no, that's true. We 100% don't want to be. They were always worried a colleague would see them and they would be embarrassed if they knew that they were looking for a date on Tinder or something like that. So those sorts of things happen. And I just kept learning. I just keep asking questions. I just
Mhm.
open the conversation.
No, that's a great tip. I mean, as you said, just to know how people interact on the platforms there, just because I mean, they may be if you're using them in the US or Canada, people will be behaving differently. And if you go abroad, you're like, oh, what's wrong? And does no one like me? Why isn't this happening? So it's
Mm-hmm.
that ahead of time. That is very important. And while we know to do that when we travel, but I think just because these are the things that we don't think about as much, and so it's good that that you reminded us all that we should find out what to expect and how things behave, how people behave, and that way we don't get disappointed or frustrated or just confused in general. I mean, I
Hmm.
know I'm generally confused, so it's
Dating
good
is confusing.
for sure. And I guess speaking more of dating, in your experience, is dating abroad that much different than dating sort of like in the US? Or I think in terms of like you already mentioned, obviously there might be some cultural differences in terms
Mhm.
of um how people might behave, but are there sort of yourself, are there things that you would do differently or, certain precautions that you may or may not take that if you're dating abroad than at home? Because I assume that, just in general, it's one of the things we remind solo travelers all the time is when you're traveling, as long as because when you're at home, you'll take certain precautions, you'll make sure you're safe. So as long
Mhm.
as you're generally like that as well when you're traveling, it's rare for a solo traveler running into any issues. And so I'm wondering if the same also, I mean, obviously the same would apply to dating, but I wasn't sure if there's anything beyond that.
Absolutely. So I think one, existing in the world, I can speak as a woman, is dangerous. You have to be aware. You take precautions when you walk out to your car. You take precautions about how much alcohol you drink when you're in public. Those types of things are just constantly on a woman's mind in the States. Those things also exist abroad. I have not been in a circumstance abroad that I haven't already experienced in the States. Everything that I was ever up against, positive and negative, I also experienced in the States. So there is similarities in that vein. There are things that you have to adjust for because you're solo and because you're in a non-familiar environment. If I'm in my hometown, I know where things are. I know which direction takes me to the safer neighborhood versus the back alley that I really should avoid. This is the way to the bus stop versus I don't even know where that road goes. So if I'm abroad, I don't have necessarily that bit of information. So if I need to exit a situation, what's my plan? Um, for those who get SIM cards or have a working phone, do you always have a working phone? Is your phone 100% going to work when you're abroad? I would say you need to prioritize that both financially and with time to make sure that that's an option if you're going to choose to date. Because heaven forbid you need to exit a situation or it's just getting late because you ended up talking 2 hours longer than you thought. You need to be able to order an Uber. You need to be able to look at directions if you haven't downloaded a map in advance. Those types of things are things you need to plan ahead of time before you agree to that date.
Mhm.
Same as the state, I don't tell someone where I live. So I don't tell someone where I'm staying. I generally make a habit of meeting them somewhere, even if it's at the end of the block or a couple streets over. I try to meet them in a more central location instead of them knowing exactly where I am. Uh, that's just a good advice for anywhere. I share my location, mind you. I sent a meme to my friend yesterday of like, girls will share their location. Okay, so I'm going out with this guy. Like, I'll check in a little bit and let you know. And they're like, well, I'm in California. I'm 10 hours time difference. And yep, stay safe. Like, what am I going to do if something goes wrong? But so I share with several people in several different time zones, just kind of to try to give them a heads up. But those are habits and things that I do when I date that I would encourage everyone to make a habit.
Mhm.
There's never going to be a negative with having a working phone or making sure that you know the Uber or a bus or what time the last metro is. Those are just good things to know.
Mhm. For sure. Yeah, and once again, most of that to me is just, as you said, just keeping, your good sense about you and just making sure that
Absolutely.
you don't put yourself in a bad position.
Well, and I don't drink a lot in general, but I'm very conscious about how much I drink when I'm on a date. Like that's 100% something I pay attention. One, as a single woman, also on a date, keep my wits about me, all of that sort of thing. So I'm also pretty good at setting a healthy boundary in that choice. And I would also encourage other women of like, keep an eye on those types of things. But
Mhm.
that's the same that I do in the States too. So not any different.
And even, I mean, and you, if you're enjoying yourself, you want to make sure you remember the date as well. So it's no point in getting drunk, just not being able to
Of
remember.
course, absolutely.
So, so yeah, no, good advice all around. Um, And of course, that also leads us to the other question of, can you tell us about both your best date and maybe your least desired date that you encountered while during this adventure of yours so far?
I have the hardest time picking best and worst. Like favorite country, least favorite country, favorite date. It's so challenging to me because I find it a bit unfair to like pit them against each other.
Mhm.
But I've also been incredibly lucky to have gone on such a variety of wonderful dates. I mean, as my best date, the guy that I had the most chemistry with, and we talked and talked for hours and, closed down the bar, is it the person that I did paragliding with in Turkey, where we just did something so active and out of the box, and I had the most amazing time. Is it that one? Is it for bad dates? Was it the one where halfway through the date I realized that he was a part-time magician and he proceeded to whip out a deck of cards and started doing card tricks at the dinner table? So,
Were, were they just not
bad,
good
not
tricks?
bad.
Were they just not good tricks, or did you just not like magic tricks?
He legitimately like did these tricks, and my card was the nine of clubs, which is entirely valid. But I can't say I ever anticipated at dinner that someone would whip out a deck of cards and start doing pick a card, any card. And it's just like, oh my goodness.
I,
So
for one, am learning a lot from your tips because I love magic, and so I haven't actually whipped out a deck of cards during the date to do this, but now I know never to do that because
just
I was
never
going to
do
say, I
it.
think that's pretty internationally dorky.
It is well, and certain at a bar maybe, and if you talked about it, but like at dinner, like we're at a
Mhm.
dinner table, that seems. It also for me, I I had one of those moments where it's a bit like an out of body experience. I was like, if I was sitting on the other side of this restaurant right now and watched a date, I love watching other people's first dates, like guilty pleasure, hide me in the corner. I'm just going to observe and drink my drink. And I was like, if I saw my own date right now, I would never be leaving. I'd be in the corner having cocktail after cocktail going, what's happening? No, he didn't. Oh my gosh. Like I would be fully engaged in the viewer experience. And I had this moment of like, oh, this is really happening. This man left his house and he said, don't forget my phone, my wallet, my keys, my glasses, deck of cards, deck of cards, just in case.
Just in case.
Just
So good. So
so,
he
that
might
was
read the room
entertaining.
so well.
But like for me, mind you, there wasn't the chemistry there that I was hoping for, but
Mm.
I was entertained. So
Yeah, I mean,
I think that's one of the most underrated features of solo travel is eavesdropping on
oh, it's
other people's
fantastic.
conversations.
Mm-hmm. Full on meeting strangers, just observing what's happening in front of you. Absolutely love it.
mm. And I mean, although you mentioned paragliding, once again, I'm taking notes for myself, but anything, but you also mentioned there was a few other ones. I'm just curious whether beyond, I mean, other than the paragliding, because it's hard for me to find a paragliding attraction. Is there something else that you might recommend? Or no, was there some another date that you really enjoyed that stood out in your
There
mind?
were so many. Honestly, mind you, this wasn't the first date. We'd gone out several times, but rented a car and drove to another part of the country and went on this really cool hike that was
Mm.
absolutely amazing. And that was incredibly memorable. And I so enjoyed that. And I will cherish that memory. Um, there's, I've done several hikes. I did kayaking with a date. I also, and this is just a little tidbit that's going to end up with a sidebar. Um, it's important to clarify your vocabulary. Dating vocabulary, even amongst the US, is very vague and confusing, and there's no consistency. So when someone says, we're just hanging out, are you hanging out? Are you dating? What's the definition of a date? Um, hooking up. What is hooking up? To some people, it's just kissing. To some people, it's more. If you say the phrase Netflix and chill in the States, that means something. I had someone offer Netflix and chill, and I stopped and I said, I would like some clarification because that means something very specific in the United States. And this person was like, oh my gosh. And I was like, that's what you just said to me, and that's how I heard it. So just pausing and realizing that you bring your cultural bias and your language assumptions with you. And not always, sometimes English is the first language for these people, but not always. So things get lost. And so when in doubt, stop and ask. Don't be afraid to clarify something, because I've been asked what we would deem incredibly offensive in the States, and someone meant nothing by it. They just used the word that they know to use, and there was confusion. And in those cases, it can lead to expectation of what the date actually looks like.
For sure. No, you
So,
bring up a good point there too, just because I mean, American media is so prevalent in the world. So
mhm,
these are just phrases they hear, not always realizing what they mean. Right.
100%,
So no, it's good to
100%.
hear.
So I would just say, when in doubt, be more open and direct in your communication. Ask. If somebody says something, you're like, did they mean this? Did they mean this? And often, and this is just a really honest conversation, there's confusion as a solo traveler around an expectation of intimacy. And that's a conversation that everyone wants to have questions about, but people are afraid to be awkward and ask. But I think you have to be really direct around that. And people can have assumptions. The American culture often has an assumption around it, and people can expect certain things. So you need to be really clear in advance before you end up in a situation that's undesirable.
Yeah, and you've I mean you've already shared a lot of really good advice about dating while you're traveling, but it's kind of finally just to kind of unless anyone has any additional questions about this, whether or not there's any sort of final advice that you might want to share with us before we move on to your very exciting trip to Africa.
Thank you so much. I hope I've shared some good dating advice. I feel like I'm always learning. I'm still adapting, making new rules or boundaries or different standards. Um, I would just say I have changed so much in my openness to it. And I have focused so much on the gratitude that comes with sitting across from someone and having them share their story, whether the night ends up with chemistry and romance, because it's a date. And generally, that's what most people are entering and looking for. I have sat across from people, and that has absolutely not been the vibe, and that's okay. But they've shared their story. I've had people share really personal and intimate secrets about their life and their family, because there's this special thing that happens when someone's maybe not going to see you again. So they feel like you're a safe space, and they dump things on you that they probably have never even shared with their friends. And so I felt privileged to have received someone's most intimate secrets or confessions or just really raw honesty and pain. And I leave that interaction with such gratitude that this person felt safe with me, such gratitude that I maybe equally shared some pain and some hard things. And at the end of that, it didn't turn into a second date and it didn't turn into a good night kiss, but that was a good use of my time. And I feel lucky to have shared that interaction and learned about this person. And so I would say focus on the gratitude. Did you learn something interesting about a country? Did you try a new bar and a new cocktail? Did they give you a recommendation for where you should have dinner the next night or some museum not to miss? I have walked away from dates learning so much about myself, about them, about the city and place that I'm in. And if you focus on the gratitude, then no date's a failure.
Awesome. No, I love that. Yeah, exactly as you mentioned, just focus on the gratitude. I mean, with everything in the world, and it's always just amazing. Like you said, if you're able to connect with someone, you're able to learn something new. It's just absolutely fantastic, and it's just such a reward. I mean, because you get to do that. Not everyone does, unfortunately, and
Sure.
so that definitely it's always remember that, and I'm glad that you do. And so now the let's move on to your epic road trip in Africa here. And so I was thinking maybe if you kind of, once again, I'm sure you hit a lot of places, so you may not be able to talk about each of them in depth, but maybe I was thinking you could kind of let us know about which countries or cities in Africa you visited, and then maybe a little bit more detail about some of the more memorable stops that you made.
Okay, absolutely. I feel like Africa is not always at the top of people's lists, and I so wish more people went because it's amazing. I left with no itinerary or time frame of how long I was going to be there, and I thought at most I'd be there like 3 months, and I was there for 12. So, you know, I just always needed more. And I didn't even finish everything I wanted to do.
Mhm.
So I could have stayed longer very, very easily. It is wonderful. The people are so kind. Yes, there's inherent challenges depending on where you're going and what sort of place you're visiting and the type of travel you want. But my goodness, it was fantastic. So I made a list before this because I was like, I don't know how many countries I went to. 14. I went to 14 countries in Africa. And my road trip in particular, I very, very spontaneously bought my car off of Facebook Marketplace. Um, I was going wine tasting with a friend, and we went
But
to a breakfast
you bought a
spot to get
car
like,
while you were in Africa.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So what ended up happening was I literally was going wine tasting with this friend. We went to a breakfast spot before we like palled around this town all day. And this guy came out and was like, "What are your plans?" I was like, "Oh, I think I'm gonna rent a car and drive across South Africa. And then I want to go to Botswana, but like, do I have to get a rental car and drive across and then come back? Like, I haven't figured it out." And he goes, "Buy a car." And I was like, "Is that an option?" And he goes, "Yeah, it's super easy." And I was like, "Okay." A week later, I bought a car. This poor guy, I don't even know his name, and he changed everything for me. So thank you to the guy at the breakfast place. But I got this car. I got on Facebook Marketplace and found this vintage 1990s Volkswagen van that had a little bed inside and a little fridge. And I was like, oh, this is great. This is my home on wheels. Put everything in there. I could sleep in my car. I can save money. And I did a little bit of research. Those cars maintain their value. And
Mm.
specifically, road tripping across Africa, it is not uncommon that people do Cape Town to Cairo, which is a very long route. Oh my goodness, a lot of driving. And people sell their car on the other side. And I was like, okay. And I realized that while there were more cars available down south, they were less in the middle. So my car was going to not only maintain its value, it was going to grow in value as there was less available supply where I was headed. And I was like, great, maybe I'll sell it for a profit. Maybe we'll make some money doing this. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
So I bought my car a week later and set off. No desk. I didn't even know where I was sleeping. Every single light, not a clue. So I just drove. And then there's a really great app called the iOverlander app that I use. And you can look up a campsite where people camp, whether it's official campsite or they camped in a, surfing like beach parking lot. And you can find out if there's a bathroom nearby, if there was Wi-Fi, if there was a hot shower, if they were bothered. People would write little reviews, be like, I felt safe or I didn't feel safe. And I used that the whole time.
Nice.
And I slept a lot of weird places. And it took me about 5.5 months. And I sold my car for double what I paid for it because I'm a
Amazing.
hustler. And so it turned out to be both a good financial decision as well as giving me the opportunity to see places that most people would never see. Because if you're going to Africa, people are flying or they're taking like a bus tour group.
Right.
Um, and so I felt really lucky that I got to see the places that I did.
Sweet. Because I mean, that's the first thing that came to my mind, and I'm sure a lot of people is how do you get around? But getting a car, it makes perfect sense when you say it now. But like you
Yeah,
said, the first thing that came to your, that you would think of. But I do remember when I was in Australia, like living in Australia, that a lot of people would do that when visiting Australia, just because it is also
absolutely.
giant
It's so
land.
big.
And the VW van is, like you said, the desired vehicle that everyone wants, because you said you
Absolutely.
just kind of crash in if you need to. And but I love the fact that you were able to make money off it as well.
Right? Full on hustler. I mean, at the very end, I sold it and I had bought some camping gear for the car. And I had like a jerry can to keep like extra fuel, and because there's sometimes fuel shortages. And I was such a hustler at the very end that I sold the fuel out of the can before I gave the car to the new owner. And it paid for
Nice.
my very last night parking in a hostel parking lot. I was like, I'll take my $10,
It's
save
cheaper
every
as
penny.
parts than it is as whole. So yeah, no, well done.
So,
Well, and
but
and I guess, was it difficult to, like, is it just a matter of showing up saying, hey, there's a car, it looks fine here, give you the money, or is there a lot, I don't know, was there additional paperwork or anything?
it's a great question. I get asked this by anybody who's ever looked into it. So, you, at least in South Africa and traditionally several other countries in the area, you cannot register a car under your name if you're on a tourist visa.
Mhm.
So, unless you have an address, you cannot register it to you. So, I sweet talked the gentleman that I bought the car from into keeping it in his name for a 6 month period of time until the registration expired. And I was like, okay, great. Are you okay with this? I wrote up an entire POA, or power of attorney, that said, one, I have not stolen the car. Two, the car is authorized to cross. And I listed every single border I was going to cross or even potentially going to cross. And then I said, I accept full responsibility for everything from a toll, a ticket, damage, liability, all of that. I wrote it all in there. And then he and I went to the police station in South Africa, signed it in front of the police. They certify it with a stamp. And then he got a copy and I laminated my copy. And I laminated a copy of his passport. And I used that paper to cross every border and I had no issue. It wasn't common. So people were like, what is this? And I would explain and be like, oh, okay. As long as it said that, and specifically people who'd done this before me, because it's kind of the only way you can buy a car there as a foreigner, at least in South Africa specifically, was they said, please make sure it writes in there that you have not stolen the car. Because even though you have power of attorney, some people will still accuse you of stealing the car. So I made sure I wrote a line item of like, the car has not been stolen. And it worked great.
Nice. Is there a website or something somewhere where it gives some of this, or was this just all information you cobbled together from?
I did weird research, some YouTube, some blogs, some Pinterest, a little this, a little that, and just kind of also then just ask questions and figured it out as I went. Because it's so uncommon that even the blog posts are typically several years old. So whatever someone did back in 2012, I have no idea if that's accurate anymore. Maybe I can buy a car, maybe I can't. So I start off with a little bit of information, but then I have to check for the accuracy of that information based on 2023.
Yeah, no, I mean, once again, I can see it being a bit of a sort of a mind puzzle trying to navigate all that, but so glad that you're able to do that. And and maybe you can, it's have you posted specifically some of these instructions, maybe
no
for the information
I need to because I get all of these questions and I got so busy adventuring that I got very behind on posting. So I have about 1 billion photos on my phone is full for the 14th time in the last 2 months. And I need to post pictures and I need to answer questions about finances and how I did the car and how I drove myself on safari, and all of those things are regular questions that I get. And I do want to compile that and make it user friendly because I want other people to experience this too. I will say I did not meet a single other female that was driving herself across Africa. I met a couple other females that were traveling, and a couple of them were very brave in doing local transportation, which brings its own challenges. But I didn't meet another single female. And I got stopped because there's police checks and border checks and checks all the time that you just have to stop, roll down your window and say who you are and where you're going. Super common, really normal, and all the time. I shocked about 1 million of those people because they'd be like, are you by yourself? And I'd be like, yes. And they're like, why? And I'd be like, because I can. And they're like, okay. And I literally had a man like stick his face up to the window, goes, like thought I was lying. He's like, are you sure there's no one back there? And I was like, there's no one back there. It's just me. And he's like, okay. So it worked out great. I was super happy. It's not for everybody, but I wouldn't change anything. It opened up so many doors to see Africa in such a different way. And I was super pleased that I did it.
For sure. And just because you had touched
Can I just ask a question? You may have mentioned this before, and I've been busy fiddling here with the questions, but prior to setting out on this big adventure, had you had a lot of solo travel experience? Because as you're talking, I'm thinking like you've handled all of the safety stuff so well, and you don't seem to be fazed at all by having to do all this research to figure out how to do something unfamiliar in a new country. I'm just like, it's really quite amazing that you've taken this all in stride. So I was just wondering if you had already had a lot of solo travel experience.
I'd had a fair bit of solo travel experience. What I hadn't done, I had only done one solo hike. When I left on this trip, I'd only done one. So solo hiking was new to me, pretty much. And I definitely hadn't intentionally ever dated while traveling. That was new as well. But the solo travel, yes, I had definitely done that before. I had never done that in Africa and these types of countries where you result in new challenges. And I think I had done, I'm trying to remember if I'd rented a car and done like a solo road trip before. I think I've only done road trips with friends. So I also think solo road tripping abroad was new. But I am unusually confident in figuring things out. Like my old coworker that's on this call will be like, yeah,
Yeah, that
100%.
seems pretty clear.
I am also just not afraid of making a mistake. Like if I screw it up, I screw it up. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Okay, moving on. I'll do it different next time. I'm not afraid to look foolish because also who cares? And generally, people are so excited to help you. I can't tell you how many people bent over backwards on the regular to go way far out of the norm to help me with whatever I needed. Whether they opened their homes and I was like, I can't find the nearest hotel. They're like, no, you're staying at our house. I'd be like, okay. Like completely like I have money. Like I'm okay. And they'd be like, no, you're coming to our house. Okay. And people just really went above and beyond on the regular. They were so excited. And I would say even more so in the countries that don't traditionally get a lot of tourism or they don't even have an infrastructure for tourists. It was so unusual. One, I don't blend in. I don't blend in, and that's okay. But they just were like, what is happening? And then they're like, okay, what can we do to make her have the best time ever? So people were great. Absolutely amazing.
That's awesome. So, Tracy, were you going to add something?
Nope, that's it for now.
Oh,
Okay.
no, that's fantastic. But I have found that, I mean, generally, I feel travelers are very generous that way because, especially,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, especially the ones that have gone out, like when you go out and you know how it is when you're traveling, and sometimes it is difficult. I feel like, you'll go out of your way to help other travelers if you can. And
Oh, absolutely. That's the concept of the couch surfing app, which I did one time. And it turned out that I met this wonderful human who proceeded to meet me in Africa. And we rode the iron ore train across Mauritania together. It's because I slept on her couch in Switzerland. Like you meet people and have such a kindred spirits, and travelers in particular know what it's like. I got a message from a complete stranger who read my dating stories and said, I'm house sitting right now. My apartment's empty in Italy. Do you need a shower? Do you need laundry? Do you want air conditioning and a clean bed? And I was like, you don't understand. You have just offered me the moon. Yes. And she literally left her keys in a shoe store, in the shoe store below her building, and let a complete stranger into her apartment, never having met her. And I got to take a hot shower and do my laundry. And oh my gosh, it was delightful. But it was just because she knew what it was like traveling. Those are the things that make you like, oh my gosh, what I wouldn't do. And
uh,
it was wonderful. So
100%.
I look to do those same one day when I finally decide to stay in one place and have a house. I cannot wait to welcome people into my home and be able to return the kindness that I received.
And just because you had touched on it briefly earlier, while you didn't use the public transportation as much, you had mentioned that you did encounter some people that did. How did they sort of find it? I mean, in terms, like, just based on what they mentioned, like, would you, and was there anything that you picked up that you could sort of give us tips, or just generally
Yeah.
how it was, or whether or not you should
I
use it?
I did a fair bit in certain places. It kind of depended. Like Malawi, I did a lot of public transportation in Malawi because I parked my car and then I took a boat to a ferry and then I took a ferry to another boat and I went to an island. And then they decided not to bring me back to where I started. So then I had to take a bus to a taxi to get
Oh,
back to my spot. So ask people. Generally, as a rule of thumb, I ask women. If I'm in a crowd and I don't know what's happening, and I'm like, okay, I think there's a slew of things that look like buses. People are getting on them on and off. I'm going to ask a woman nearby. I'm going to ask her where they're going. Where do I go? Traditionally, she's going to be helpful, as well as tip is ask the price. Ask the price of someone who's not on it, because if I get up there as a person who does not blend in and is clearly not from there, and I don't know what the standard baseline price is, I go up there and ask him a price. He's going to tell me 4 times what the average price is and what everybody else already paid. And
yeah.
I am so good about absolutely not, that's ridiculous. And I will just walk away. And then they'll come chasing after you and argue, be like, no, this is my number based on what that woman 10 feet away told me was the standard price range, which as a foreigner, I am always fine to pay a little bit of a tourist tax. I understand that I would like to pour into the community and I have gratitude for being there. I'm not okay paying 10 times the local rate, but I am completely all right with paying a little bit of an inflated rate. just in moderation. But ask separately so that you have a baseline before you even get to that and go, how much is a ticket? So that'll save you in the long run for sure.
For sure. Yeah. No, same thing. I always expect that I'm paying a little bit of a tourist tax, but like you said, you don't want to be taken
Don't
advantage of.
ask the driver that.
No.
Absolutely. And even the other people. I've had people in the back being like, no. I've actually like I have been accused of being African because my negotiations are so well. They're like, you're Kenyan, like full on you're Kenyan, you barter like legit. And I was like, thank you. Best compliment ever. But you have to know, and I've been bartering before and seen like an old woman like with her fruit and sitting on a chair going like, yes, like she's doing great. She should keep arguing. And I was like, that is a stamp of approval that I like always looking to achieve. Uber or other similar apps like Bolt can be really common in certain places. And you order, for me, I order a motorcycle because it's the cheapest. So I literally would order Uber scooter and there would be a motorcycle that pulls up. Depending on the country, you have to pay attention to how people ride. So, like in Cairo, the women ride side saddle, two legs on the same side. I showed up during Ramadan. I know during Ramadan, you're not supposed to touch people of the opposite sex during the daytime while they're fasting. So I'm now trying to get on a motorcycle, sit on the very back end without touching the driver. There's not a whole lot of space on a motorcycle. And then I'm going to hang on with one hand and then hold my purse with another and then hang on for dear life as we go between the cars. And I'm just like, okay. But I also don't mind fearing for my life that way.
Yeah. No,
Not for everyone.
it's quite fun to be because the first time I encountered, I was in Brazil and I ended up getting a motorcycle taxi, which I wasn't expecting, and it was an adventure. That's all but
I
it was the
loved it.
best way to get around. I loved it,
Oh,
but it was definitely not for the faint of heart.
no. And I mean, yes, I've had moments where I'm like, okay, this is it. I've made it this many months, but this is my last day. Um, but I mean, you're talking depending on where you are, like $1 for a
Mhm.
45-minute ride somewhere. That's really affordable versus taking an actual taxi or trying to figure out a bus system or change. Maybe it's you have to change multiple times. Um, there's a lot of shared uh, public transit options. I will say, depending on where you're going, you have to give away your standards of American comfort. Those don't exist. If you're planning to travel local transport, you're not going to have that. And you need to know what you're signing up for when you're jumping on a 6-hour bus and someone's sitting on your lap, like legitimately sitting on your lap. That's just normal. And you can't complain. And that's what you signed up for. And that's fine. I also saved a bunch of money doing that. So I think adjusting your expectations and know what you're signing up for. But I would encourage people, if you want a really local experience, look what the locals are doing. If you're about to get on a bus and it's a bunch of people that look like you that are clearly with giant backpacks and they're all tourists and travelers, that's fine. If you want to do that, do that. But also look at your crowd and go, are these people commuting to work? If they're not commuting to work, then this probably isn't the local bus. This is the fancy bus. Should I change and try to find the local bus where we're going to sit in the back and we're going to hang on for dear life? And there's going to be some chickens and some children and the circus, because that also happened. The circus got on the bus.
I'm not even sure what to ask about that.
It's fine. There was a chicken. I think the chicken was trained. It was like a whole
Yeah,
situation. There was glitter. There was a drum. It was Christmas Eve. It was a very weird Christmas Eve. Okay,
as long as it's a trained chicken, you don't want an untrained chicken on the
right?
bus.
Absolutely not. An untrained
Maybe it's
chicken.
someone's emotional support animal. Who knows?
Maybe.
But
I can't wait for this book to come out.
How do I describe when the circus comes on? It was fantastic. It was fantastic. So
Just to let people know, we've got about 10 minutes left. So if anybody has any questions that they want to ask Loni, just type them into the chat and we'll just keep going for now.
cool. So, were there were there any travel essentials that you didn't think to pack that you kind of acquired along the way?
I would say I generally was pretty proud of my pack job. I tend to, Lord knows I was not cute on all my dates. Things were pretty functional, but I had hiking gear because I was hiking. I mean, I had poles and boots and I needed to have, the quick dry tank top or things like that. So a fair bit of my luggage was a first aid kit and bulky items that I was unwilling to sacrifice because they were necessary for a hike. In that regard, the only few things I purchased, before I went to Iceland, I purchased a thermal shirt, which I hadn't packed, and I purchased rain pants, a very good purchase. They were like $10 at a Decathlon in Paris. I still have them. They're fantastic. When I met some friends in Cape Town and they wanted us to go out for drinks, they took me shopping because my wardrobe was not appropriate to go out to like a club. I was like, I got nothing. They're like, is this all you have? And I was like, literally, this is all I have. These are the options. The same option every night. And they're like, no. So other than that, I didn't buy things unless I was throwing something away. And I left my jeans on a hostel shelf in Cyprus within 6 weeks of leaving the US, and I didn't wear them for 6 weeks. And I was like, this is premium space and weight. They're out of here. I left or gave away a couple things that I just wasn't using. And I will say my one weird little thing that I feel like people always ask, like, what's something unusual that you pack? I pack a bungee cord. And I use it as a solo traveler. If I'm sleeping if I'm at an airport and I'm getting there early because the last bus runs at midnight and my flight's at 4, I'm gonna sleep. And I'm gonna put my valuables underneath my head. But I still have my backpack next to me and my foot's like through a strap. I look like some weird like puzzle piece. I will take a bungee cord and run it through the table, through my bag and like around my leg. So that if someone went to grab my bag, it is going to create a commotion. It's going to wake me up. I do the same thing. I use that bungee cord when I attach my bag on top of a bus because they threw it up there haphazardly. And I was like, oh. But I also always prioritize keeping my valuables on me. I travel with a computer and a camera. I refuse to let that bag be strapped to anything. I don't care how heavy and uncomfortable it is for a long bus ride. If it needs to sit on my lap for 5 hours, it will sit on my lap. But the bungee cord, I used it frequently. It was a good one. Cafes. I've watched people be robbed right in front of me. If you don't put your purse strap like over your lap, so it's literally around your waist and around the chair, that's another teeny tiny tip. But I can't tell you how many times I've literally seen someone like snag things and go take off with someone's purse that was just hanging on the edge of their chair at a coffee shop. And you're busy chatting with your friends and then you're in a pickle. There goes your passport and your money. So those are really tiny things that I know people worry about because pickpocketing absolutely exists. Bungee cord.
Nice. Yeah, it sounds like the bungee cord is like the duct tape of travel. So
pretty much.
I have a question here about whether there are any major paperwork related items to watch out for when you're crossing borders on an African road trip.
That's a great question. Generally speaking, because I didn't plan my itinerary in advance, I typically did visa on arrival. There was a handful of countries that I needed to purchase a visa in advance. I think Egypt, Cyprus, Kenya, I think those 3, but pretty much the rest of them, if you show up to a border and the rest of your paperwork is in order and you have cash to pay, you typically cannot pay with a credit card. And you have to have US dollars. You cannot use local currency, which for me, I hadn't been in the US in 17 months. I had to either find US dollars or hoard US dollars. And they want 2017 or newer bills, absolutely no marks. They will just refuse the money if there's a pencil mark on that thing. So you have to be really careful. And so I refused to use US dollars for anything other than border crossings because it was such a need for me. Generally speaking, you just have to be the most patient human alive. Border crossings can take an hour, they can take 5. And as long as you show up, I tried to go earlier in the morning and just know that this is my day today. I made no other plans the rest of the day. Today is a border day. They're stressful. I bring a book. I have my cash. I plan to get a SIM card when I get to the other side. But if that's what I accomplished today, then great. And you just show up with no rush, just get through. And generally, visa on arrival was fine. No problems.
Good tip. So yeah, just as you said, just look ahead and find out based on your passport what's possible because in some situations they might have to do it ahead of time. But it's definitely the visa on arrival is so much more convenient. And you had touched on the fact that you're using cash. I guess that one of my final questions, since we're getting close to
Mhm.
our end time here, and unless anyone else has any, last call for any final questions, is did you find yourself using cash pretty much all the time, or did you?
No, I'm a credit card points person. I used my credit card every single opportunity I had because I would use my credit card points. I stayed 5 nights at a very bougie place on Zanzibar looking over the Indian Ocean with my own private pool, and I spent no pennies because
Nice.
I saved my credit card points. And I was like, I've been camping in my car for 5 months. We going fancy. And it was great. But I used my card. One, I'm very choosy about what cards and how to like use that system to work in my benefit, which is an American thing. Sorry, I know there's Canadians in here. You guys don't have the same options that we have. But in that regard, I have a Schwab debit card, and that card reimburses all of your ATM fees. So I never had to worry about going to the wrong ATM and getting a $30 fee, because sometimes they are a 30, 20 or $30 fee. It didn't matter how much you pulled out, like that's just the fee. And so being every single month, if I needed cash, I used that, and I was reimbursed at the end of the month for that ATM fee. So I didn't lose. So that was good. I tried to be really good about the amount that I pulled out, that I wasn't ever having to exchange back. But we got down to like counting pennies and be like, okay, I'm not going to have lunch today because I have, $6 left and I have to use that for the bus. I don't want to get more money out and I don't want to lose money in exchange. And so I just made choices around trying to use as little cash as possible. Borders, borders, you just can't. There's no other option.
Okay, good to know. And I mean, it's good to know that you don't have to carry like a lot of cash on you
Oh,
anywhere.
yeah. No, I didn't.
That's just not a good idea in general.
Here's another money tip. I divide all of my money up in my bags. I divide my credit cards, I divide my cash, because one, it happens. Pickpockets, people, it happens in certain places that someone comes up to you and is like, give me your money. If you open your wallet and they see a stack, they're taking all of it. But if you've divided your bills into different pockets, you hand them the 100 that you were saving for your border, but I've got another 100 folded up and tucked somewhere else. I'm not completely destitute when I've been unfortunately taken advantage of. Same thing with credit cards. Someone snakes my wallet, all my credit cards are gone. I'm stuck. Like I'm in a pickle if I can't get any money out. How do I pay for a place tonight? You have to freeze them all, Apple Wallet, like the whole thing. Divide your credit cards, divide your cash, keep them in multiple locations in your luggage. Don't ever check them, but divide them up, different pockets. It's really important.
You bring up an interesting point there. I just remembered as well. Like, with a lot of credit cards now, you can, when you put it in your Apple Wallet, they'll actually have a different card that goes in your Apple Wallet. So if, like I said, if the physical card gets stolen, it still will work on your Apple in your digitally without having to,
Mm-hmm.
so you don't have to worry that you're left without a card. But I mean, of course, that's assuming you still have your phone. But for anyone that is putting their card on their phone as well, see whether or not the credit card has that option, so that it's a different virtual card than it is a physical card. That way, you have some backup just in case you do
Yeah.
misplace it.
Always, ultimately plan for those things to happen. Instead of being unfortunately surprised and having the worst day ever because something gets stolen, plan to have it, okay, if this happens, this is what I'm going to do. Have your numbers written down somewhere, stuff it in a sock at the bottom of your bag, have your money divided so you still have some cash or some credit card that you never use. We all have that one that's just there for emergencies that you've had for 15 years. Tuck that somewhere. Who cares if it has a fee at that point? Tuck it apart from everything else and make sure that you have a plan in place so that if, I don't want to say when, but if something were to happen, you are not left going, I don't know what to do. You at least have some direction to start the process of figuring things out.
Great advice. And we are basically at the end, but I wanted to sort of once again thank you so much for joining us, Loni, and thank you everyone who's joined to listen tonight. But also want to find out what you have planned next, what destinations you have, or what destination you have on the list, and also whether you're going to continue with dating at all your future stops.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. I've so enjoyed this. I love answering people's questions. I always want more people to keep traveling, and particularly a big proponent of solo travel. So thank you. I am definitely going to keep traveling. I leave the US at the end of the month. I'm headed to Sicily to write my book. I decided that an island seemed like a good creative space to write, and they have great food. And I wanted to pick somewhere a little quieter and stay a little bit. So I'm going to go there. Yes, I'm going to keep dating. Why not? There's lots of people to meet and fun experiences to have, and who knows what's next.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much once again, and I look forward to seeing all your other adventures. And might I say, sort of just listening to you speaking about your adventures and also reading some of your blog posts, it reminds me very much of that book. Believe it was called Wild. I think that they
Mm-hmm.
made it. So that's I was wondering whether or not some of it might be inspired by that. But
it wasn't, but I get compared to that a lot. A little Eat, Pray, Love meets a little Wild, a little hiking, a little all of
yes,
the adventures. So yes, no, I'm flattered. Thank you. She is a
no,
wonderful writer, so I appreciate it.
excellent. And of course, if anyone does want to follow Lonnie's adventures, LonnieJames.com is where you can find her, and then all her social media handles are available there as well. And definitely, keep track of her activities because she does some very, very interesting things, and we can live vicariously through her until we're able to embark on our own adventures. And so, with that, thank you so much to everyone for joining us, and hope to see you at the next meetup. And go to solotravelerworld.com to sign up for our newsletters to keep up to date about any future events that we have. And also, of course, there's a lot of great blog posts with a lot of interesting information with a lot of interesting people that we share every single week. So thanks so much and see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Loni.